Hello and welcome to this new episode of the s01e10 podcast. I'm Paolo Valdemarin.
And I'm Ewan Semple.
And this is episode 10, if I remember well.
Well done. I'm glad you remembered. I couldn't.
It has been some time since our last episode, not that anybody will notice, but...
well, the joys of RSS, it doesn't matter, does it really? You just pop up.
Exactly.
There you are.
Yeah, we're not live anyway. Who knows when I'll have time to edit this thing and post it? I think that it's worth saying that we are recording today because a few days ago you sent a message saying, "Do you want to talk about social media regulation?" And I said, "Sure."
Well, that was before. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, what triggered it was the events in New Zealand with the shooting in the mosques and, understandable concerns about the role that social media played in that, but people yet again pronouncing social media broken. And I responded with a tweet and a post that said, social media isn't broken, people are. And it was partly just out of a concern that we... In a rush to blame the platforms or to put in legislation or whatever, we sort of duck the evolutionary opportunity of just growing up and taking some kind of collective responsibility for things. Somebody somewhere must have known somebody who knew somebody who did these types of things. And then the other thought was that at the same time as that was happening, the school kids were walking out of school in protest against environmental issues. And then subsequent to the shootings, the amazing response of the New Zealand government and the Prime Minister and the fact that they were able to ban automatic weapons within 6 days or whatever. Again, we got to learn about that on social media and talk about it on social media and potentially copy it as a result. And then even more recently, since suggesting we did the podcast, the events in the UK where somebody sort of, almost on a whim, decides to set up a petition to revoke Article 50 and try and put a halt to the exit from Europe. And the next thing you know, it's got 5 million plus signatories. It's the biggest petition, certainly in the UK, and who knows, maybe in the world. And so again, just a great example of how it's so easy to get over exercised about the downsides of social media and forget about the upsides.
So you are saying people can learn and they can improve.
And you're sounding skeptical, Paolo.
No, I mean, I'm sure that this is true and that social media plays a role in this. I'm not sure if this is due to the fact that social media is not regulated. I mean, would it be better if it was somehow regulated?
Yeah.
Are there things that we can do to make social media better? Or, just leave everything evolve, quote unquote, naturally? I guess that my main concern about social media is the fact that it's not unregulated. The truth is that the social media is profoundly optimized
exactly.
to do the best thing for the social media platform, which is try to get as much attention as possible. And we all know that conflict and tension and all kind of silly thing are a very good bait for attention.
Yes, and I find it funny that the old media are getting all holier than thou about Facebook, but they've known that for decades. They've always exacerbated the negatives and underestimated. But I think you're right, because I'm not for any moment suggesting that they're not involved, that they're not accountable to some degree. It's more just that it's too easy to blame them and not take responsibility or not take the opportunity to steer things more ourselves. I mean, and this comes down to even just the knee-jerk reaction. Sometimes when I post things on Facebook and I'll just get people having a rant at me, and I just don't know where it's come from. And you think, well, just if you just stopped for a moment and slowed that down just for a moment and thought, what am I saying by reacting this way? If we all did that, we could work things out more effectively.
Well, I think that overall, whoever has the time and the will and the attention span to realize that problems are much more complex than, what a quick soundbite on social media can be or can sound, are much more likely to live a happy life and maybe find some solution to problems than all these quick reaction. I mean, I guess to some degree, the challenge is that most social media platforms tend to favor this kind of, short, very dry, very quick communication. So it's a bit harder to create context and to really have a deeper discussion. You say something. I guess that the problem is that you write something like what you just mentioned on social media, and of course you do it in the context of a conversation that you have been having
exactly
within yourself and with the rest of the planet for the last 15 years more.
Yes.
But if somebody just catches that one line and reacts to that one line, they're gonna get it completely wrong.
Which is why I have my Facebook group closed to friends, because when I occasionally open it even to friends of friends, it all goes horribly wrong.
Yeah, well, I guess that the problem is that most people live like that, and I guess that the problem is the problem with people, or is the problem with social media. From some point of view, I think that it is actually interesting how reading Mark Zuckerberg's latest post, it does appear like they want to go more towards conversations between friends.
Yes. And I think Twitter has been making some interesting moves in this way. I can see a difference with Twitter. I heard Jack Dorsey's podcast with Joe Rogan, and not that he did particularly well in the podcast, but he was acknowledging that there were consequences to just the way Twitter's designed. And I've noticed a higher quality in Twitter, because I stayed away from Twitter for quite a while because it was just getting so noisy. And just before we lose it, just to go back to the thing about me only making my posts available to friends, I'm aware I could be open to the criticism of living in an echo chamber, but I make sure that within that group of friends there are some people who test me, and you might have seen this on occasions. And also I know that each of those friends will then take some of the stuff we've talked about and migrate it out into their networks. So I think it is that question of just how much noise you're willing to put up with in terms of in contrast to signal,
Oh, your friends, and I'm doing big air quotes as I say friends, on Facebook are the most entertaining thing, because you post something and I read their comments and I imagine your face as you read that comment, and it's so much fun.
Well, it's funny because forgive the language, but I'm thinking of instigating an "oh for fuck's sake" rule. But if I sit here with my head in my hands going, "oh for fuck's sake," more than 3 times, you're out.
Yeah, you should write about this. Just make people. Yeah, it's like, look, there is this rule. Yes. I'm sorry, but you're going to be
even I have
out.
limits. Well, but you say that, but then there was another guy who said recently that one of the main reasons he stays on Facebook was me. And again, it's not that I'm saying that I'm special or clever or whatever, but I think each person in their own network, in their own ecology, has the potential to do the same sort of thing and to take that responsibility and to deal with stuff that comes up,
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy very much my Facebook stream because there is a lot of people I really like and I found inspiring. I mean, not only you in my stream, and it's so I like Facebook. At the same time, there are times that you kind of peek over the shoulder at somebody and you see others people's stream. Yeah. And you say, oh my God, I mean, how can they
Well,
there
was a guy recently who I won't name, but who I know, who, in real life as it were, who's very intense, very clever, way off one end of the spectrum, and has been posting incessantly for the last week or so about QAnon. And I hadn't really picked up on what QAnon was, and sort of regret opening the lid on 4chan and all the stuff around. So just for those of you who are listening who don't know, QAnon is a character appeared on the bulletin board 4chan, looking very much like he was an insider in the Trump government. and sort of predicting things or alluding to things or dropping hints that looked like they became true, and just has basically unleashed the world's conspiracy theorists. And this guy that I know is just... I thought originally it was a piece of digital performance art. I mean, I thought he was taking the piss. But I'm beginning to think, no, he actually means it. He sees all of this as serious and true and sees himself on some heroic path to save the world from not just one, but multiple conspiracies. And it's just, like you say, pal, you open the lid on some of this stuff and you think, wow, there's a whole other bonkers universe out there.
And the amazing thing is how close they are. I mean, recently I was discussing with somebody and suddenly it felt like they thought that the whole Melania Trump conspiracy, she's not really herself. I mean, they have many clones being sent around in her place being true. And it's like, you think they're joking and say, well, it can't be true, right? No, but I mean, she can't be like 4 inches shorter. I don't know what you're talking about, but I really, but I think it's interesting because you said that it's not the internet, but it's people. It's not social media, but it's people. The truth is that as we have learned, every day it's people processing information. Yes. I mean, everything that goes through social media is processed by people.
The problem is the meatware.
And, well, exactly. I mean, and as much as we can congratulate ourselves on being so clever and so good at building our own very, very good stream of very, very clever people that we never disagree with, I mean, the truth is that the rest of the internet is made by others
who will feel just as strongly.
Struggle.
Well, partly, but equally, there will be others who think just as confidently that they are managing their network and listening to people that are sensible.
they think they're
That's
clever,
right.
And they want Brexit and more guns. So it's exactly.
But also, it's partly just letting the ropes, isn't it? I mean, I was thinking this the other day there. In fact, in a webinar I was doing this morning, they introduced me as having been involved online for 20 years. And I thought, oh, bloody hell, 20 years, really? But it was taking me back to remembering Usenet and the old days, and was it alt-rec misc binaries, which was just a cesspit of humanity. And you'd sort of tinker in it, first of all, because you sort of thought, oh, this is amazing, you can get access to all this stuff. And then you quite quickly just back off, close the lid and never go back again. And a couple of stories recently, which I can't really retell, about people I know who've just stumbled into stuff and made it a part that they never did that. They still haven't learned what... And again, this is something about the videos of the shooter in New Zealand and wanting to protect people from it. And I'm thinking, well, yes, I kind of understand that, but what the hell are they doing going remotely near it?
It's... I was mentioning before, as we usually do before start recording, there is a very interesting documentary. It's on BBC now. It's called The Cleaners, and it's a story about moderators on mostly on Facebook, from what I understand. And there is people working for a subcontractor in the Philippines, and there are many interesting aspects. Some of it is how these guys are exposed to something like 15,000 images a day that they need to say yes, no, and that is kind of the fact that we're forcing this onto people for very few dollars is probably needlessly cruel. And I mean, they have problems with suicides. I mean, people have mental health problems after a while they're on this job. The other interesting aspect is how these moderators, who are all very proud about what they do and their role in society, how they are protecting the internet from all these crazy content, actually have their own very specific and Filipino points of view. I mean, there was one supporter of their very, very fascist president thinking that killing a few million of drug addicts should be the right thing to do, like Hitler did. with Jews. The other one, very, very religious people. And you think, so not only the internet that we experience today is processed by all the rest of the planet, but it's also processed by these people that, of course, are following rules, but they also have their own idea, and we have no idea they even exist. Yet they are there, and they are influencing, they are filtering everything that we see.
Yep, and as again we said earlier, I find it funny that the mainstream media will vilify Facebook for either not dealing with it or dealing with it in these behind the doors sort of ways. But news media have always done this. They've always chased negative stories because that's what makes people pay more attention, and they've also filtered. And I remember working in Television Centre when the news feeds were coming in from a war zone, unedited, that you had to have a strong stomach just to sit there. So it's not a new problem in that sense. And just as you were describing their activity, I was thinking, well, yes, wouldn't want a young child of mine or whatever to be exposed to disturbing images randomly on any of these platforms, and I understand the instinct to control that. But equally, we've never put limits on the girls' access to the internet, and on occasion they've done a search that's come up with something challenging. Either at one stage they were too young to care, or when they became old enough to care, we talked about it, and I don't think there was any long-term harm. And I can remember being deeply disturbed by images on those original bulletin boards of, people being executed in China, and just horrible, horrible images, which have stayed with me. And I'm almost not sorry that they've stayed with me, because I know that mankind's capable of that. I mean, it's a bit like the argument.
I guess that the difficulty there is around how much, if you want culture, you have around that. Because if you have the structure to cope and manage and make those images part of yourself in a positive way, I mean, as negative as the images themselves might be, then it's an opportunity to grow. If you don't have that, this actually reminds me, we have been watching a TV show on Netflix called Delhi Crime. And basically, I'm just back from India, and I kind of, I missed Delhi, I guess, a little bit. So we started watching this show, and it's a very, very raw story about the gang rape that happened a few years ago in Delhi, which was a major thing that actually triggered some new rules and laws. But at some point, there are two characters discussing about why this violence is happening. And they say, and one of them says, there is this growing population in the city, moving towards the city, of young males with very little culture, with very little understanding of sexuality, very poor. They are exposed to very rich people, and the difference is getting farther and farther away. They're exposed to a lot of porn because they have phones and they can watch whatever they want, and they struggle to cope with all this stuff. And it's not to justify.
No, but I couldn't argue against being concerned about that either. It's interesting, isn't it? I think it's partly because it's happening in a rush. Well, is it?
Well, I guess, it's how many people died in the early days of cars. Yeah. Because nobody had figured out that it's better if we just pick a lane and we all go on the right or on the left. And
yes, you're right.
I mean, at the beginning, they didn't think about it. And it's and this didn't stop cars from being developed and used. It just became better, and people became better.
And it became obvious what was damaging, what was an acceptable risk, what wasn't.
And it keeps changing because, these days you wouldn't dream of driving a car without certain security devices. And, when we started driving, why would anybody want to do that?
That's really funny. So the feeling of getting into a car and not putting on a seatbelt, which is just sort of inconceivable now. is to me the same thing as clicking on a random link that somebody sent me in an email.
Yeah, exactly. Is that why would you do that?
Exactly.
But there is plenty of people who do.
Yeah.
Probably probably what is happening is that the speed of evolution of things is becoming faster and faster, while human brains are not improving at the same speed. And probably the gaps between what the potential of the offered by technology and actually our ability to cope with it is becoming.
And that's my
bigger.
concern. That was my reason for the tweet about a too quick response. That we ought to have the conversations about the consequences of our reactions, if you like. So if we decide to lock everything down, well, is that good? Is that going to cause its own problems? Is allowing fascists in the Philippines to decide what other people get to see going to cause more problems than it solves? And we're not, I don't think, in a position to have those conversations at the moment, because most people don't even understand that that's happening. So it's back to my rant about the ideology of algorithms. We're making very significant decisions which will either enable or disable our ability to mature and grow up and take advantage of all the learning that the internet affords us, because too many people don't really understand the question.
And they don't understand the complexity of
Yes.
I guess the real challenge is that there is not one question. There are many interconnected questions, and they are all interdependent.
Yes.
And nobody really understands the whole complexity. So all we can do is experiment with it. But certainly, the solution is not an easy solution, and that implies turning something on or off. That's for sure.
Exactly. And again, I think the opportunity to use the tools to talk. I mean, this was something I used within the BBC. Always using the tools to talk about our use of the tools, so that we matured in our use of the tools and we learned what worked and didn't work. And because we were able to learn faster, there was more chance of our learning keeping up with the rate of the problem, if you like.
I guess that maybe part of the problem might be that back in those days we had a pretty good understanding of how the tools used to work. Mm-hmm. So us learning how to use the tools was, in a way, a more direct experience.
Yes.
These days is a little bit like, with cars or any other type of sophisticated machine. These days, we don't really understand how Facebook works.
No.
I mean, we have some ideas. Some of us might know a little bit better than others, but mostly it's a black box. It's something that we interact with, but we don't really know how it works. So to some degree, the conversation about the tools is meaningless because, to some degree, back in the day, we actually had an influence on the direction of those tools much more than we have today.
Yeah, well, even just today, somebody on Twitter referred to TrackBack, which got me all nostalgic. I just remember the days when TrackBack sort of worked, and you could see who had referred to you. And that in itself, I think, was a good, constraining is not the right word, but a good feedback mechanism. There's a much more direct connection between me saying something, seeing responses, being able to decide whether I was troubled by the responses or not, blah, blah, blah. Whereas, as you say, on things like Facebook and Twitter, there's so many complex algorithms going on in the background, I can't be sure what I see means anymore.
Yeah, but most of all, it's very hard to understand what is the context of what you're saying, because you're seeing this little snippet and figuring out where that belongs, because there are so many conversations. Very often, you try to climb back up a conversation, but it's hard, and it has all these different.
Or even just trying to find something you glanced at 5 minutes ago on Facebook is horrendously difficult, because the feed's changed by the time you try to look back through it again.
Yeah, and you will never find it again.
Yeah.
I mean, it's because of course they try to do everything they can to avoid showing you the same thing twice, except if that sometimes it's exactly what you would want.
Because it's your own brain that you're trying to recover. That's right, exactly. I mean, this is obviously what motivates me, certainly, and I think both of us, and in doing this podcast, is just, I don't think there are easy answers, and I think engaging more people in trying to grapple with and this is frankly the issue that I think we're seeing in our politics and other things, is that the politicians just haven't kept up with the way the world was heading, and they're getting caught out by the fact. Well, some politicians. I mean, some. Again, obviously, Jacinda, and I've forgotten her surname, in New Zealand, does seem to be very smart and connected and aware of how this environment's increasingly working. But certainly the British politicians just seem to be woefully ignorant of it. And frankly, we're all paying the price because they're just not keeping up with the rate of change. And so, and yet many of them don't know that. It's like trying to get businesses, chief execs, senior people to sort of acknowledge that this is actually a big problem and they need to address it.
So you're saying that you don't think that what we're seeing here is a very, very sophisticated way to avoid doing Brexit while saying that we're doing Brexit.
Talking of multi-level conspiracy theories, trying to make sense of what Theresa May's doing is way up there.
I think that she is brilliant. She's basically trying to get off this Brexit shit. I mean, she didn't want to begin with, right? You
think Trump's a genius as well, don't you? Obviously.
No, I'm not getting that far. Basically, his genius might actually be trying to reform the whole American society by leading it to a collapse,
precipitating that fall. Yes.
Yeah, that maybe you're right. Maybe he is a genius. Yeah. It's brilliant. It's look. I don't remember what comedian. There was a comedian the other day in my Facebook stream who gave such a perfect description of the current situation in the UK as far as the politics are concerned, that you were really sitting there wondering, why am I hearing this from a comedian? I mean, it's.
What's his name? Pike? No, what's his?
Yes, yeah, Pie.
Pie. That's right. Yeah.
That's him.
Yeah, exactly. If he can work it out,
exactly. Why can't anybody else? And it's but I think that was a pretty clever analysis about how the contract between the politicians and the people have been broken by cutting down on a whole number of very essential services and things, and basically the people rebelled.
Yep.
And they rebelled with what they had and with the tools they had. And this led us to a place that unfortunately did not replace those politicians, and everything is even more broken than it was before.
But if it is a grand falling apart, then I swing between thinking it's horrendous and thinking it's exciting. Because being an eternal optimist, we will there will be some bumps and there'll be some grazies and there'll be some pain along the way, but I think we will work this out. And in a funny way, it's almost like Britain has self-immolated, but we'll learn first,
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm an optimist too. I mean, I think that things are much better today than they were even a very, very short time ago. And that, yes, there are bumps in the road, but overall we're moving in the right direction. I mean, from this point of view, having spent 10 days in India between this podcast and the previous episode, you go there, and the most present feeling you have is that things are getting better. I mean, things next year are going to be better than this year. That's for sure. Everybody expects that. I mean, the economy is growing at 7%. 7% is something you notice, okay? It's something that it's something that you see. I was there last time 3 years ago, and I could tell the difference. I mean, from the cars, from the traffic, from the people, from the feeling was completely different.
And it's interesting how you could respond to that by thinking, "Oh bugger, they're winning, and we're losing," or you could think, "Thank goodness, somebody in the world is working out how to do this. We can copy them."
Well, I guess that the funny thing is that from any point of view, they are copying us.
Yes, but they're also beginning to outstrip us. I mean, I think the same is true in Africa. They're unencumbered by some of the crap that we're dealing with now.
I think that the challenge is that, like, I mean, while I was there was this little war thing with Pakistan where they shut down planes and you do have the feeling that they are moving towards a much more fundamentalist view of things. I mean, there is a clear movement to sort of establish much more of a Hindu state, which is not exactly good from my personal perspective. I don't think that religion should be part of anything, really.
Well, there's a can of worms to open at the end of the podcast, Paolo.
Yeah, well, but at the same time, there is this going back to the internet is this fascinating idea that they are doing everything at the speed of the internet. So yes, some parts of society, some part of the even about the infrastructure, if you want, is medieval. I mean, I was walking in a narrow alley of Old Delhi, and it's as much as as intense as you can imagine. Okay,
I'm so jealous.
But you turn on your phone. I mean, out of curiosity, I switched on my phone, and because there are all these cables everywhere. I turn on my phone and I check if there were any Wi-Fi network, and there were pages and pages of Wi-Fi.
That's interesting, isn't it?
So the thing is, and this is not forget that everybody is walking with a smartphone, but they even have wired networks in the houses in Old Delhi. I mean, these houses that are falling, and yet there is high-speed connectivity.
Yeah.
And so everything is kind of moving at a different speed. They're not doing again what we did. They're doing some of what we did, and there is a whole bunch of other things happening at a different speed.
China's the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Same, and probably
and Africa. Actually, I mean, there's people in Africa who are living in a mud hut and don't have any gas for the cooker, but they've got 2 mobile phones and they've got ways of charging them.
And at the same time, there are countries like Myanmar where this is the situation, but apparently the only internet they really have there is Facebook.
Yeah.
And suddenly, when you look at what happened to the Rohingyas, you start thinking, okay, maybe we should be a bit more careful about what we do with social media platform, because you have a very successful platform, and the point is you have a people that, at least this was part of the documentary. I don't know a lot of it about it, but apparently there is a majority of the country which is genuinely and honestly racist against these other people, and this is what race represents.
Was a genuine, honest racist better than a dishonest racist?
Yes, well, a dishonest racist is somebody who may be racist for all the wrong reasons. They are honest.
Right.
They are honest racists. They are as honest as they come. They truly believe they are a superior race. And they have created one of the worst humanitarian crises in history.
Yeah.
And of course, this being a huge echo chamber, people tend to reinforce their own ideas.
So
what do you do there?
So
I mean, it's such a complex problem. And I'm not saying, the solution is just turn off Facebook or put them in jail.
So okay, going back to that can of worms that you opened on the religious thing, I think I'm finding it funny these days that and it's to do with India and the ideas coming out of India about non-duality and about how much we create our own worlds through our own labelling and meaning and narratives and whatever else. And so I found myself, and this is part of why I'm reading so much of this stuff, if we're going to try and replicate human consciousness in technology, what the hell is human consciousness and what we're trying to replicate and why and what's the consequence? But it's also making me it's interesting how in some ways I think the answer, here we are, the answer's not 42, it's that combination of going inwards to truly strip away as much as you can the conditioning and the dogmas and the rules and the cultural conditioning that we don't even know is sort of happening, if you like, just trying to get really down to what am I and what am I doing and why am I doing it, at the same time as being very aware of the fact, increasingly aware of the fact, that we are actually all on the same planet and we're all connected in ways that we've never been before. So it's this interesting potential to go in two very opposite directions at the same time. And I personally am beginning to feel that's the only way it's going to work, is if we can somehow encourage more people to take those moves.
Well, ultimately, if you think about it, enlightenment is about going inside and losing the limits between yourself and others, right?
Exactly. And so I did a post about this on Facebook the other day. That, your organised religion is about division. It's about division between God and us, or me and others, or them and us. And all the rules and the rituals, I think, are intended to exacerbate that, but they certainly do exacerbate that, even if not intentionally. And then the contrast I was saying, that attempt to strip away layers of those narratives and conditioning can only lead to the fact that we're all part of the same exploding star, and we should act like it.
Well, and on this happy note, I think we can wrap up this episode and thank everybody for listening.
Yeah, and I bet they didn't expect to have the answer to life, the universe, and everything as well. So there you go. Bonus.
Yeah. Free with every episode of State of the Net podcast, a complete solution to your struggles. Please tell your friends to download the podcast.
See you next time.
Bye.